Passion in my pocket, so my penny should be. What they selling is cheap, so I'm buying that this freedom is free. I've been becoming me. See when Jesus taking the lead, with purpose I bleed and rise like going under the heat. Defeat is a never. You can't reattach with a sever. What's bringing you pleasure can tell you where you stacking your treasure. When storm is your weather, know that it gets worse for it's better.
Welcome to the Esau McCauley podcast. I'm your host, Esau McCauley, and today on the podcast we have Mike Cosper, who I think is the Senior Director of Media for Christianity Today. Did I get that right?
I think so. That's last I heard.
So today we're going to eventually get to talking about some of President-elect Trump's cabinet appointments. But in this podcast, we have this thing, this silly game called Are You Washed? And I should probably explain where this comes from. To be washed just means to be like, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's up to. It's like when I used to play basketball and I realized I was dribbling and I said, I'm going to cross over on this guy. I'm going to fake left and go right. And then my knee literally spoke to me and said, Esau, what are you doing? Do you not realize we're old? And I realized I was washed. I just can't play basketball anymore. So the game Are You Washed means like, can you still do the thing that we're about to talk about? And so we often ask our guests to answer a question related to the topic, but it's not directly related to the topic. And so since today, we're talking about Trump's cabinet appointees, I thought we would look at one of the first cabinet appointees, namely Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of Treasury for our first president. We're not even going to talk about Alexander Hamilton. We're going to ask about the play, the musical Alexander, what's just called Hamilton. And so the first question I want to ask you, maybe this will be the only one. I need you to give me your medal stand. That means your top 3 Hamilton songs and explain why they deserve the respect that they have.
Okay. Well, I have good news for you, which is that I'm very well prepared for this because I'm a family of musical theater kids. And so I've been dragged along to many a Broadway show. And I genuinely enjoyed that one quite a bit. So I think number 1 for me is One Last Time.
Gold medal. You got to do gold medal. You got to give it the gold. It's the medal stand. Yeah.
Okay. So gold medal for me is One Last Time.
One last
because
time.
I think that's Washington's, speech. Like, I mean, he did such an incredible job of actually getting so much of Washington's actual words from his resignation speech into that song. And it's such an important moment in American history. It's just beautifully done. I love the performances on the recordings of it. It's just fantastic. So One Last Time is my favorite in the musical. I'm trying to think, what's the song? Oh, I should pull up the playlist. My next 2 are both Burr songs because Burr's the most interesting character in the show.
Really?
I think so for sure. I think the musical is about Burr. I mean, the musical is about Burr's inner wrestling as much as anything else. But what is it? Dear Philomena? Is that what it's called? The song to his kid.
Theodora.
Dear Theodora. Yeah. That is just such a beautiful song. I could just listen to it anytime. And then in The Ring Where It Happens, we all know that feeling,
The room. It's the room where it happened. It's the room where it happens. Look at this. The ring where it happens.
I got boxing on the brain, man, because of Tyson.
Oh man, I would tell you. I have nothing. We should have done a podcast on the Tyson thing. We're going to get to this, but you activated my ADHD. Speaking of being like, I think that what the entire Tyson thing was, this may relate to being Washington. All respect to Iron Mike, who will knock me out in a moment. I think that we all tuned in the hopes that AG wasn't real. Mm-hmm. And we found out that like the reason that Father Time is undefeated is because Father Time is undefeated. And like 2 minutes into, I remember watching the I think I tweeted this when he walked in and he had a knee brace on, and I just like, I'm not sure you should show up to a fight with a knee brace. So did you watch the fight?
I did, and Look, I'm not usually I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. Like I don't I don't think the NFL is rigged. I don't think MMA is rigged. I don't think any of that stuff is rigged. That fight was rigged, and here's why I think that fight was rigged.
Conspiracy Mike.
Conspiracy Mike. Second round, he lands 2 really good punches on Jake, and one of them sent Jake spinning. Jake, he was dazed. He whipsawed his neck back, and then after that, Tyson stopped punching. Like he really doesn't punch from there to the end of the fight. The fight. I don't know if it was that the fight needed to go to the distance, or I don't know if the fight was like fight him to a draw. I don't know what the deal was. I know he got paid. I know he got a lot of money. Listen. I know they all did well. I just don't believe for a second that Tyson would have stopped punching, and he basically stopped punching after the second round.
So we will call this the Mike Cosper Memorial segment that we just added to the podcast.
There you go.
What is a conspiracy that you think is actually real? Like I'm not going to start asking my host this, but we didn't bring you on to talk about conspiracy theories. We didn't bring you on to talk about Alexander Hamilton. Wait, did we get the bronze medal? No, room where it happens.
The room where it happens. Yeah.
Okay. Mike, producer Mike, I'll give you a chance to jump onto the podcast right quick. Do you have an honorable mention Hamilton song that you feel like interviewer Mike has missed out? Do you want to help him a little bit?
I mean, it's got to be "You'll Be Back," right? King George. It's so good. It's the highlight of the show.
None of you's going to actually mention Alexander like the title, the opening song. Y'all are fired. I might cancel the podcast. Never mind. Sorry, not you, Mike, because I've been said I can't fire producer Mike anymore, and I love Mike. So I will say to you, there's a lot of things that I didn't plan on doing. I probably could have imagined doing a whole episode on Hamilton. One thing that I never thought that I would actually do is do a podcast on cabinet appointees, because to be honest, I normally don't pay attention to them. So let me ask you, for the people who are interested in this, like, who is normally chosen for a cabinet appointee? Are these things normally controversial, or is it relatively straightforward in American politics?
I think it's there have been other controversial. I mean, I can't think of it. Nothing comes to mind immediately, but there has been controversy around cabinet picks before. Nothing like this. This is a new level. And I mean, Trump's first cabinet had some controversial picks. Rex Tillerson had no experience. Betsy DeVos came in, without any real education experience. So there was controversy around that one. But again, what he's done with this one is another level. The way to think about this is that Trump is the head of the executive branch, and these people are the ones who actually execute. They actually get the work done through the different elements of his administration.
So how many like cabinet appointees are there? Forgive me, I don't have the exact number.
Oh goodness, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head.
Just give me let's say there's 20, 25. Is that about an accurate number?
Yes, but the executive.
Producer Mike has an answer. Mike has an answer.
15.
Okay, so if there's 15,
there's 1,500 appointments that the president and his cabinet will make.
So the only reason I asked that question is to kind of give us a context. So let's say if there's 15 appointees in a normal cabinet. I'm sure there's a controversy in every kind of administration, but how many would you say kind of raise the ire of people in a normal session versus like how many do you think out of the 15 here are controversial?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the Biden administration as an example. Biden's pick for Homeland Security was a very progressive guy, California politician, and that created a certain amount of controversy. Now he got confirmed, but I think that there was some noise about that. That was one. First Trump administration, there were maybe 2 or 3 that were fairly controversial.
How many would you say in the current Trump cabinet that will be controversial?
I mean, it's going to be the majority because of the way things are going. I mean, so far, like the only one that's sort of pure non-controversial, I would say at this point, is Marco Rubio.
Okay.
There's going to be opposition to almost anyone else that's coming through.
Now, normally, I was trying to do some research on this, and I just looking at the normal backgrounds of the people who are selected into different cabinet positions.
Hmm.
And it seems to be the case that normally the person who goes into the cabinet, this might seem straightforward, who goes into the cabinet has a long history in that particular area for which he will now oversee like the government. And that doesn't seem to be the case in the Trump cabinet. Is that a fair depiction, or is it often the case that people are chosen from outside of the area of expertise to run governmental institutions?
No, I think that's fair. You normally see people who have some significant experience, not necessarily with the department, but with the field, right?
Okay.
So for instance, oftentimes somebody who's going to come in as the director of national intelligence is going to be somebody who's come up through the agencies, or maybe they're a politician. They were in the House and they were on the Intelligence Committee for a number of years, or they were in the Senate and on the Intelligence Community for a number of years. That's kind of the normal route for this. What we're seeing with some of these are people who have had literally nothing to do with the federal agency in which they're now in charge, or they're very distantly connected to it. It's wild stuff.
So let me ask you this then. For the people who say that one of the things that Trump ran on, actually let's set Trump aside for a second. It is true that sometimes when you are inside of an institution and you learn the bureaucracy, that the institutional speak and institutional ways of being can become an echo chamber. And it is good to have someone who's from outside of an institution to come in and change. And apart from the cabinet, that idea that sometimes you need fresh ideas is something that we can at least acknowledge, right? We would say, oh, I don't agree with everything the Department of Education has done under Biden. And so maybe someone who's not, trained in kind of the same ideological system. So maybe I'll ask you this. If there are issues with the current outsiders to the Trump that Trump has elected, what kind of outsider would actually be good? Because we can't say that the only people who can ever do something are the insiders.
You want somebody who's got a demonstrable competency as a reformer or as a leader. Somebody who's demonstrated that as a leader I can get things done, I can gather people, I can clean something up. You could imagine. So, for instance, the Pentagon is the largest bureaucracy in the United States. Like it's massive. I think 3 million employees are attached to it. And you could imagine somebody like a weird pick for that would be like a CEO who turned around a Fortune 500 company. Like, why on earth would you put a CEO in charge of this? Well, because we want to clean up they just audited it and they don't know where $2.5 billion went. Clearly, there are problems with the bureaucracy. So you could understand putting someone in there who's like got this thing where it's like, well, I fixed Colgate. We had problems. That would be a sort of a reasonable choice.
I think there's a young black guy who like fixed Red Lobster or something. Or he just took over. There's a young black guy who just took over. Is it like one of the Olive Garden? I think it's one of those two. So you want to get him and put him in charge of the Pentagon? I'm just kidding.
I'm not suggesting that, but look, I would be less worried about that than somebody whose experiences. And again, to Pete's credit, he was a soldier. He's a decorated soldier. Served multiple tours. Compared to some of the picks, like he's less offensive at this point. And
so for the people who aren't following this very closely, you just referred to Pete in passing. Who is Pete? Who you referred to, and what was he appointed to?
Pete Hegseth is a combat veteran. Multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's decorated soldier, but he's really his career since he got out of the military has been as a TV personality. He's the host of he's the morning host on the weekends on Fox News. And so, the idea that this guy who has been a television host, has been a spokesperson, I think the case that is going to be made for Pete Hegseth is he's going to be a great torchbearer. He's going to fix some of the recruiting issues. He's concerned about the right things. He wrote this book, War on Warriors, that's all about how like the problem with the military is the DEI and woke culture inside the military and all of that. But the idea that he's going to be able to to lead this massive bureaucracy, this massive institution, that he's going to be able to even understand how it works. It's not a very serious idea.
So there are, that I can think of, at least 3 members of Trump's cabinet who were either on television or had significant elements of television. So that would be Pete, who you just mentioned, and then Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is actually a nominee. That's just not on the internet, right? That's real, isn't it?
I hadn't seen this one. This is
last
real?
night that came out.
Oh my gosh.
Dr. Oz. To be in charge of Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah, so Dr. Oz was in charge of Medicare and Medicaid. And then you had, and once again, I used to watch, like, way back when I was in like high school, I used to watch WWE. And I think there are different storylines where Linda McMahon was involved in, like, I don't think she wrestled, but I think she was like on television and like,
she was a playable character in the video game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean. So like, so those are 3. Are there other television people that I've mentioned? And it might be a wrong, I'm trying to ask this question as fair as I possibly can. That seems like a pretty high number of like television personalities to be involved in running our government, especially if you want to say that like our President Trump was also on television in The Apprentice. That's 4, the president and 3 of his cabinet. Are there other people who had TV shows that I don't know? And do you think that he did that on purpose, or is that a coincidence?
You know, I do think it's on purpose. Trump values this a lot. I actually wrote an essay for CT last month called "The Soul of MAGA" that really tries to understand a lot of kind of the heart of the movement, and I talk a lot about television and how important it is to Trump, and how that really defines his relationship with his followers. You look at, I would point to a pick like a Tulsi Gabbard. Like, why is Tulsi as influential as she is, right? Like, she's a senator, or she served a couple terms as a congressman, and she has really made her bones as a pundit, as a TV personality in the years since then. She's great on television. She's very articulate. She's very compelling. She's very beautiful. People like having her on camera. And so, you know, I think that certainly influences that pick. And, you know, and then Robert F. Kennedy has had the success that he's had in this past year of influence by making the rounds on every bro podcast that would have him on. So I think that all really, really matters to Trump. Media matters a ton to Trump.
So maybe I could ask you this question: this feels like something of, and I don't want to be an alarmist, like a dangerous experiment. Because one of the things that we've always wondered is, like, I think that all of us think that bureaucracy is bad, like that the government is bloated, that it's inefficient, that it wastes our money, and that we don't always know how these things are functioning. But it seems like we're going to find out over the next 3 to 4 years if it actually matters to have competence in the kind of workings of the government. It's like, is it possible the government could halt? I mean, what could happen? Maybe I'll put it this way: what could happen if these people are actually not able to do the job? This is apart from their politics. But what will happen if these people can't do the job? How might this actually affect ordinary Americans if you have people who can't do this work well?
You know, you asked that question, and a story comes to mind that I think is actually a really good illustration. It's sort of a metaphor for it. A while back, I was talking to somebody who was part of a very, very dysfunctional megachurch. I won't say the name for, you know, the sake of this conversation, but
do it. No, don't do it. Don't do it. I was kidding.
No. I'm not going to do it.
Don't do it.
But,
don't do it. Go ahead.
They were part of this very dysfunctional megachurch, and they were in the middle of a building program. They were trying to build this massive facility, and there kept being delays. And the pastor, you know, who later was fired for sort of narcissistic abuse and bullying, he got ticked off about the delays, and he fired the general contractor and said, "I'm going to do the GC work. I'm going to take care of it all." And so he goes over there one day, and they've got pallets and pallets and pallets of drywall sitting under tarps, and no one's hanging the drywall. And he's like, why isn't this drywall up? Why this stuff is just sitting here? And they're like, we don't have a roof yet. If we put the drywall up and it rains, it'll all be ruined and it'll cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he's like, look at the weather. When's the roof going to be up? Let's look at the weather. There's no rain, predicted in the next week. And we're going to have the roof up within a week. So get the drywall up, get the contractors over here, put them up. Well, what if it rains? Well, it's not going to rain. They put the drywall up, and what do you think happened the next day? Pours down rain, destroys all of it, right? Yeah. And so I think of that because that's one of those things that like a smart GC who knows that he has to be responsible for the finances and has to be responsible for the outcomes. He's never, ever, ever going to do that, ever.
Yeah.
And only somebody who comes in without any of that experience, who hasn't seen the things go wrong and all of that, they would jump the gun and say, I'm going to make a snap decision based on my gut because I want to get this kind of thing fixed. That's the kind of stuff we're going to see in an administration staffed with people who really don't understand the bureaucracies and haven't been a part of them.
So I think that one of the things that makes this a little bit tricky is that when you start examining the Trump appointees and you start dealing with the issue of competence, it almost leaves aside the different kind of ideological issues. So in other words, it could make it seem like we thought, well, all of the people in the Biden cabinet were great, and all of the people in the Trump cabinet are going to be horrible. And I would say I had ideological disagreements with the people who in the decision they were making in the Biden cabinet. But this doesn't seem to be a question merely of different ideologies motivating different cabinets, even though those are problematic. But you're actually talking about the ability to do the job. Is that a fair distinction that we're getting at?
Yeah, 100%.
And so maybe I should ask this then, that apart from that issue that you raised, there are who are the people, if there were 2 or 3 appointees who you would say trouble you the most? And you didn't know about Dr. Oz until just now. But are there 2 or 3 people who you say, well, no, both as it relates to competence and as it relates to their ideas, I'm really worried about what they might do in the White House or in the government?
That's easy. I mean, the 3 for me that I'm worried about are Robert F. Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, and Matt Gaetz. And I think Gaetz is probably the most concerning of them. Probably Kennedy next, and then Gabbard.
Can you give us some why for each?
Yeah, so Matt Gaetz has been nominated to be the Attorney General, sort of Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States. He'll be overseeing the FBI. And Gaetz has, not only does Gaetz lack experience, he was trained as a lawyer. He practiced law, I think, for something like 12 to 18 months, but not criminal prosecution or anything like that. So he's truly, truly unexperienced. But Gaetz is also somebody of a profoundly low character. When he came to DC, he got rid of the policy shop in his office so that he could hire more communications people. Because to him, his job was not to legislate, which is what Congress is there to do. His job was to try to get as many cable news hits as possible. And that's what his entire shop was based upon. There are stories about him showing pornographic videos of women that he had slept with on the floor of the House to other House members. That's been shared by multiple other people, Republicans included.
Is this, sorry, I just want to make sure that I understand this. Are these things that people have spoken to on the record, or is this just kind of White House rumor mill?
No, Mark Wayne Mullen, who's now a senator, but was in the House with Gaetz a few years ago. Mark Wayne Mullen has told the story on the record. You can find it online. So someone who is a close associate of Gaetz is in jail right now for sex trafficking of underage girls. And Gaetz is the subject of a House investigation in which it's been leaked that there was testimony from 2 women who said that they were underage when they were paid to sleep with Gaetz. So whether that investigation becomes public as a part of the vetting process for him or not, that's something that they're debating. Mike Johnson, the head of the House, has said he doesn't think that investigation should become public because Gaetz resigned from his position.
As people, as a Christian, we obviously believe that something like character matters, and that on a character level and on a competence level, it seems to be pretty straightforward that this is an unacceptable pick. Yeah. And I'm wondering, have we seen any Christian commentary on this? Like from Christians who would be traditionally, obviously, Democratic leaning Christians are going to be obviously up in arms. Have you seen Christians on the right stand up and condemn this pick?
We have seen some. I believe Albert Mohler came out this week and opposing the Gaetz pick, and I saw a couple of others. Dan Darling has spoken out about it as well. So there've been a handful of Christian leaders and a number of Christians in Congress have expressed concerns as well.
So I just wonder about. And I think that sometimes I can fall into this trap and say, like, see, we told you, like, this is the stuff that you see. But for this whole idea that that Trump was going to bring some kind of protection of Christianity, like, it seems that a choice like this on its face is like profoundly. It would be an insult to the Christians who supported him to put someone like this in charge of law enforcement. And so I guess I'm wondering, has there been any realization, even at this stage, that we might be getting more than what we asked for in his appointments?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've been waiting for that realization to dawn on people for 8 years. I'm not sure why it would now. Look, Trump said he could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and his followers wouldn't walk away from him. Yeah. He incited a riot on the Capitol and his followers didn't walk away from him. When the Gaetz pick was announced, I had a lot of friends of mine who were kind of close to Trump world who were saying, He's putting Gaetz out there so that he can ensure that he gets Hegseth through, because Hegseth is unqualified. But when you compare and contrast the two of them, Gaetz is a way more offensive pick. Yeah. And I just rolled my eyes when I hear that because I'm like, no, Trump's putting Gaetz out there because he expects to get him because Trump is a blunt instrument. He says exactly what he's going to do and he does it. So why would this be any different? Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope the Senate shows up and opposes this.
Now, you mentioned two more, and I don't want to just have you run through them, why this is bad. But who were the other two that you mentioned?
Yeah, let me just give you the quick down low on the concerns. One is Tulsi Gabbard. And, it's not hard to look at Tulsi's record. She's got a record of being an apologist for authoritarian regimes, particularly Bashar al-Assad, who's responsible for a level of death and ethnic cleansing in the hundreds of thousands of people in Syria. And then the other is Vladimir Putin. She's been appointed to be the director of national intelligence. And there's just very serious security concerns with someone like her. And then the other one is Robert F. Kennedy, who's been appointed the head of Health and Human Services. And Kennedy is a crank and a conspiracy theorist. And
does he believe that Tyson threw the fight? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So you should understand. Black people, we have this thing called trauma laughter, and when things get bad, when things get really bad, we just gotta laugh at some of the ridiculousness of it. So I do want to ask about. I want to see if we can avoid simply being pundits and talk about what this might mean for the church.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that government does that the church can't do is healthcare, in the sense of we can help pay for someone's medical bills. We can help people with basic needs and give Tylenol and, basic stuff. When it comes to like an infrastructure of the health system in the United States, that is beyond Christian compassion. It's one of the duties of government. And so part of what we do as Christians is that we vote for people, or we hope to put people in place who can provide the kinds of care that extends beyond our compassion. And part of our stewardship of our political process is, are the people who are in charge of tending to America's health, the most vulnerable amongst us, right? The sick, will they do this job well? So I see those things as, yes, there's the stuff that the church can do, and there's stuff that the government can do. And when we're in that place of looking at what the government can do, like regulating vaccines and things like that, we have to ask, who's in charge of that? And so help us understand, what are some of the ideas that RFK has that might impact the people who are most vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really horrific illustration of his effect, which is a story that took place in American Samoa a few years ago. There was there was an incident where a couple of kids died after being vaccinated with the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and it was a medical mistake. It was a massive problem. It was an awful incident. Robert F. Kennedy came in as part of a campaign to say that the problem was the vaccine itself, and to then compel parents on American Samoa not to vaccinate their children. And within a few months, there was a measles outbreak on American Samoa, and there were tons of unvaccinated kids that got measles, and I think something like 83 kids died as a result of it from an utterly preventable disease. That's what this sort of dark web world of anti-vax, anti-medicine, conspiracy theory kind of stuff does. People get excited about Kennedy because he says, we should do something about obesity, and we should make our food supply cleaner and healthier and safer and all of that. And those are fine ideas. In fact, those are probably ideas that just about anybody that was competent that you wanted to put in at HHS would be supportive of some of that stuff. But what he actually proposes is often very, very absurd and frightening. And then there's the whole abortion conversation, because RFK is pro-choice through the 9th month. There's some great reporting out there that explains why HHS is important when it comes to what matters for abortion care. They make decisions about what's regulated and what isn't. The abortion pill gets regulated through that sort of thing. Interstate commerce related to abortion gets regulated through that. So he could have a profound influence on the availability of medical abortions that is a loss for the pro-life movement, for sure.
So if you have RFK, who's a 9th month abortion, I forget the language, like he supports abortion in the 9th month. And you had, I remember seeing during the campaign, one of the things that they actually ran on in the Republican Party, I remember hearing Vance talk about this during the vice president debate, is he was pressing the Democrats on exactly this issue. So maybe this might be a silly question. Why would they put someone in charge of health who had policy opinions that disagreed with their own platform?
Well, because the platform, I don't mean this to be, I'm not saying this flippantly. The platform's meaningless, right? Like the most honest platform we've had in the last 8 years was the one from 2020, when Trump basically said, we're not going to have a platform. I am the platform. Like if you look at the way Trump operates, what he cares about is feeling like he got a win in any situation. He doesn't actually necessarily, there's a few policies he cares about, but he wants to feel like he's winning on the economy, he's winning with the public, he's winning with different things. For him, getting conservative justices on the court was about winning. It was about the deal that he made with the Republicans to get the nomination. It was not because he cared about abortion.
Are Christians standing, once again, I'm asking this question, forgive me for not being, are we seeing strong resistance to RFK amongst like the pro-life movement, the Republican pro-life movement?
I haven't seen a ton. I mean, we've seen some, but there. I haven't seen a ton, and I think it's unfortunate. I think what you are seeing is the Mike Johnsons of the world and the various Republicans of the world saying Donald Trump won. He gets to appoint who he wants to appoint, and kind of leaving it there.
So this feels like a lot to me. Like in the course of this conversation, I've heard about I need to be worried about national security. I've heard about I need to be worried about law enforcement. I've heard that I need to be worried about healthcare, polio. My son was freaking out because I think there might be, forget me which one. It may be measles or something. It was actually found here in Elmhurst where his school is located. But it feels like politics is beginning to take more and more of our energy. And that the idea that as an individual Christian, or even as a church, I can speak to national security and healthcare and all of these things feels like a lot. But you just wrote a book that actually talks about this very idea. It's called The Church in Dark Times. And part of this book is to say that, maybe I get this wrong, you can correct me, is that the church's detachment from some of the ordinary kind of evils that goes on in society that allows that to flourish. Is that a good read of what you try to get in the book?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what happens is the church gets co-opted by, utopian stories of one sort or another. And sometimes those are internal to a church. You look at a church like Mars Hill, where Mark says, look, if we can reach young men, we can change the world. And it creates this iron logic that bends morality and it bends reality, and it bends the way people see things. Or it becomes about, MAGA and all of that sort of thing. But the church gets co-opted by these movements. And once that happens, once you're unrooted from the story of God and the word of God, and once you lose sight of the fact that you're a small part of something that's bigger than you, and you start to think we're going to change the world, that is a recipe for disaster.
So you don't think that a Christian should try to change the world?
No, I actually don't. I think that's actually an important thing to delineate. Now, here's what I would say. It is good for Christians to want to see the world changed, but it is also good for Christians to have the humility to understand that's something that happens in the providence of God. That's something that you achieve through prayer and repentance and renewal, and it's something that's larger than us. When we start to think of ourselves as like we can be the change agent, and I've got the formula to make it happen, that's when things start to go astray.
So if you're saying that if you get the strong leader casts the vision for how they're going to fix and save the world, and you support that vision, and supporting that vision causes you to filter out all the ways in which this person or this movement does not reflect the kingdom of God, those things that you ignore in pursuit of that vision is what allows evil to flourish. Is that a fair 100%. Take on it? And so you would then say that you would say that for the Christians who said, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to vote for like what I think is the more pro-life candidate. I'm going to vote for the economy, whatever it was. And then they cast that vote and they kind of meander off. And that just allows this entire aftermath of what we're seeing in the cabinet. Is that a manifestation of that, or am I tying together things that don't fit?
No, I think that is, there's an extent to which that is definitely a manifestation of that.
But your focus is more on like how this might work in the church then versus like out in politics. So the book, the book deals with the politics side of it a bit, but it's more focused on how do churches become abusive systems? How do they justify things? Again, it applies. Like once you find yourself, think about all the ways that Christians have attenuated their convictions about morality and politics since Donald Trump came into office. If you want to understand why that happens,
people often say, well, it's about a cult of personality. And there's some truth to that. I think I don't deny that. But I also think the bigger thing is the story they're telling themselves about why it's so important for Donald Trump to win, right?
Yeah.
They're telling themselves this story of like apocalypse if he loses. And that justification ends up, that justifies a lot.
One of the things that is tricky for me is that I don't want to say that like a church is bad because it's big. Because
Sure.
I'm an Anglican and I go to like old, I go to England and I love these cathedrals and I see these huge buildings where you would think that back in the day, people would gather in these places to worship God. And there are these huge monuments of the faith where, lives were changed and people would come in droves to hear, preachers from the past. And so I don't want to argue that every single large church is bad. And I don't believe that every large church is bad. But are you talking... Is this a problem that is only exists in big churches, or are these kinds of setting aside problems for the sake of mission also the case in medium to small churches? Mm-hmm. And what kinds of that's the first question. And then what kind of advice would you give to help the church resist some of these things without giving away too much of the book? Because we want you to read it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, a great example that I think illustrates why it's not limited to like mega churches necessarily is the Camp Kanakuk that Nancy French has reported on. They had sexual predators in their midst, and the reason that those guys were never held to account for so long was this story that they told themselves about the work of the ministry is so important. We'll deal with the individuals. We'll make sure that whatever. But the ministry is so important. To me, that's the logic of abuse that we have to become much more aware of. When we start saying to ourselves, the mission is so important that, this guy yells at his staff and he chews through his assistants and, nobody leaves here happy who's worked here. But man, look how fast the church is growing and look at all the good that we're doing. Once you start making those moral calculations in that way, you've given yourself over to, what I think is just an ideology. It's not a faithful Christianity. And that can happen in some very small churches.
You talked about the church in dark times. Are these times uniquely dark, or are we more aware of the kinds of toxic leadership that we just would have been ignored in the past?
Yeah, no, I think... I don't think human nature changes. So I think to a certain extent, there's always a darkness. This is trying to name a particular darkness. I think what is unique about our time is, and again, I get into all this in detail in the book, the effects of sort of post-Enlightenment thinking, secularization, the way that makes people lonely and rootless and at a loss for a sense of meaning. Those are all the ways in which our day is a little bit unique, and that's what sets up, whether it's a totalitarian movement or a cult or an abusive church environment. We're sort of turning, like, people are sort of prey for predators because of those circumstances.
I recently started. I'm planning a church here in the area, and I recently got back into pastoral ministry while still doing my podcast like I'm supposed to and teaching Wheaton College. And I spent a lot of more time in that season dealing with pastors and engaging with pastors. And there is a sense in which there's reality that we can feel a little bit under attack. And there's a lot of things that clergy do wrong. And I want to say that at least some clergy don't start off trying to be narcissists who create cults of personalities that then damage people. Do you think that we need to, it might seem like strange, should we make local ministry local again? Is that one solution that you might address in the book, Mike?
One of my favorite memes that we see on Twitter is there was an op-ed in the Times a while back that was just titled "We should know less about each other."
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like you'll see breaking news, like some horrible thing that somebody has done, and then somebody will just post that headline, "We should know less about each other." We should know less about each other in the church. We should know less about what's happening in local ministry. I mean, my favorite example of this actually, and I promise this relates. My favorite example of this is the whole blow up that happened a few years ago between Sohrab Ahmari and David French. When Sohrab Ahmari said the problem with America is Frenchism, because David French is the kind of conservative who says, "Hey, live your life, do whatever you want." And as a result, we get Drag Queen Story Hour in San Francisco. And this just kicked off this whole Drag Queen Story Hour, controversy. And the reason I think this is relevant is 25 years ago, Sohrab, who lives in New York City and is a conservative Catholic, would never have known that there was such a thing as Drag Queen Story Hour in San Francisco, which, by the way, has been going on in San Francisco for decades, right?
Yeah.
It's a phenomenon of the internet that, on the one hand, we get outraged by fringe things that are happening in small communities that are far away from us, and it animates our politics and it polarizes them. It's also a phenomenon of the internet that we get attached to personalities and celebrities that are parts of communities that are far away from us that we have nothing to do with. The Driscoll phenomenon was exactly one of those. And the power that he ended up having in that church, the reason he was able to bowl over people was not necessarily the 14,000 people that were showing up on Sunday to hear him preach. It was the 2 or 3 million that were tuning into what he was doing from elsewhere all over the world.
So a larger scale
momentum.
Creates.
Yeah.
So I want to see if I can give us some positives. Because we now have someone who is currently in power, who will be in power for the next 4 years, who has put people in power who themselves might do damage to the country. And he did so by telling the people a story that they wanted to hear about rescuing America. And you have mentioned that there's parallels to that, where people are rightfully concerned about the future Christianity in America, and a fast-growing church with a charismatic leader can justify ignoring some of the things that happen as a result of that ministry, the negative things that come. So what kind of hope do we have to resist either one of these movements when we had to do things like raise our kids, pay our bills, go to work, be a good neighbor, be a good parent, be a good sibling? There's an entire life that we have to live. And if all of our free time, that when we're not directly living our lives, is battling, 15 different types of evil, that feels like something of a joyless existence. Is there something that you might want to encourage us to do that might be hopeful and life-giving? Either you can choose one or the other, you can do both, as it relates to politics of the next 3 or 4 years, or even dealing with issues of corruption in the church.
I end the book on this. I really do think that the most important thing for us, if we want to see these issues in the church get resolved, and if we want to see the church sort of freed from its captivity to political ideology, what we actually need is renewal in our worship. The church needs to be about God. The church needs to be about the story of God and the people of God. I think a renewed commitment to the importance of the liturgy and the sacraments and the prayers of the people. I mean, I'm getting all Anglican with you here, man.
Okay, I'm in for it. And if you close on the Bible, I might start preaching that. So, Mike, producer Mike, we need to have a sermon podcast episode where I just preach for 45 minutes. But no, so the church, it's so amazing. I'm so glad you said that. I love it. Like the church actually becoming the church. Make the church Christian again. Because one of the things, and I'll end on this, and maybe we agree, and it's going to sound weird because I do write for the New York Times. We just did a whole podcast on the Kaepernick. But I have found, for me, politics even Christian resistance to evil in politics has become almost a way of hiding from God. And they're like in our own need for renewal. And I just become convinced that I have to pay attention to this stuff when it really pops up, because I feel like the cabinet was particularly interesting. But I feel like we need to remember like that politics is part of the Christian life, but not the whole of the Christian life. And that I'm not saying that we avoid politics in the church and become less political. I think that we did that at the first half of the podcast. But I think the idea that the story of God is the defining story of humanity and what God is up to in the world. And they're telling that story and they're living from that story might be the means by which we actually engage in politics more healthily. In other words, we need to make politics theological again. It's something I can end the podcast on and say amen. And I want to encourage you all to pick up The Church in Dark Times, because it's not just a depressing book. It's going to tell you that we're all doomed. It's a book that's going to both diagnose and give us some prescriptions for healing. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Mike. And you did a decent job of talking about Hamilton. And so that might have earned you a return visit.
It's good to be with you, Esau. Thank you.
The Esau McCauley Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Stay Low, Stray Low. If you know, now you know. Edited by Seth Gorvet, like a Corvette. Music by Rob Noor. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast and leave a review so more people can find it. See you next time. I'm out.
I'm penning these letters with prayers they can aid your endeavors. It's clever benevolence, tasted it, wrestle with, still wrestling. Touch my side and it crushed my pride and told me I'm blessed within. Receive a Christian platitude with gratitude, but in the saddest news I live in doesn't add up to the Beatitudes. Catch me in the catacombs, chiefing like they Pat Mahomes, catching bullets, tackle foes, running plays, defending zones. Field got him doing football numbers, only half is grown. He was acting grown.